Welcome to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. Tonight's top stories. In Illinois today, Catholic Governor Pat Quinn signed a bill legalizing same-sex marriage. We'll talk with Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone, point person for the bishop's campaign to defend marriage, about what's at stake and what comes next. A Florida judge has ruled against the publisher of a study on same-sex parenting that angered gay rights activists. The study's author, sociologist Regnerus, joins us to discuss his research and the backlash. And Senator Rick Santorum is back in the public eye, promoting a faith-based Christmas movie. We'll talk with him about Catholics in pop culture and politics and his own political future. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a somber commemoration. Today, President Obama led a wreath-laying ceremony at the gravesite of President John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was assassinated 50 years ago this Friday. Americans are commemorating the life of the nation's first and only Catholic president throughout the week. On Friday, a memorial mass will be celebrated at the Cathedral of St. Matthew in D.C., which also hosted Kennedy's funeral mass. Typhoon Haiyan tore apart the Philippines earlier this month, and now the Catholic Church is helping pick up the pieces. Catholic Relief Services is aiding the estimated 11.8 million people affected by the storm. CRS has committed $20 million to the recovery effort, which is expected to span several years. Last week, the U.S. bishops approved a special collection in parishes for the Philippines. In a 5-4 vote, the U.S. Supreme Court has refused to hear an emergency appeal involving a Texas abortion law. Planned Parenthood and others had asked the High Court to block a part of the pro-life law that requires abortion doctors to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. The law also bans abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy.
Every day I prayed, and then I woke up this morning and I could talk. I don't understand it. I even gave my candle away. But my favorite scripture says, with God, all things are possible.
That was a clip from The Christmas Candle, a new movie from Echo Light Studios that's coming to theaters Friday. I recently had a chance to talk with Echo Light's CEO, whom you may recognize from his 2012 presidential run, former Senator Rick Santorum. Well, welcome, Senator Santorum. Thanks so much for joining me.
Pleasure. It's great to be here.
Well, let's start by talking about this new movie. What got you interested in producing a movie? That seems to be quite a departure from politics.
Well, it's not really. I mean, if you're concerned about the future of the country, and you really believe that we're going off on a path away from the values that made our country great, we have to look at what the cause of that is. And certainly one of the causes is politics and what's going on in Washington and across the country. But a bigger, I think even a more impactful cause is what's going on in the public, in the popular culture. And movies are a big part of that. Movies, entertainment generally. And so for a long time, believers, Catholics, evangelicals, the whole slew, played defense. Why are we playing defense when we have the truth? We're the ones that have the truth about what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful. Let's start making things that are good, true, and beautiful, and entertaining.
Interestingly, also on November 22nd, America marks the 50th anniversary of the death of President John F. Kennedy. And he's such a pivotal figure in so many ways for Catholics in politics. In a sense, open the path for Catholics to reach high office, but also in a speech that you've been critical of, and many Catholics have looked at and taken a second look at in recent years. His speech to the Houston Ministerial Alliance, where he talked about this real cleavage, I guess you would say, between his Catholicism and what he does in public life. And he had a lot of statements in there that you took issue with as a Catholic politician. Why do you see that speech and JFK as someone who began to maybe move Catholic politicians down this path of keeping their faith out of their public life?
Well, I mean, we don't recognize it now because it's, Catholics have been very much a part of public life and sort of assimilated in with the culture, if you will. But back then he was breaking ground in a big way, and there was a huge effort against him by I think it was Norman Vincent Peale and others who saying we can't have this papist. And so this was a big live issue as to whether a Catholic could be loyal to the United States and not loyal to Rome. And so it was an important issue for him to address. But because he did address that issue, and because he was such a significant figure, what he said had huge weight. And what he said was the right thing, which is, I'm going to be the President of the United States. I'm not going to be, consulting Rome on foreign policy or anything else. But he did more than that. He basically threw faith out and gave some rather absolutist types of rhetoric that I think opened the door not just for a Catholic to be elected president, but opened the door for faith to be forced out of the public square.
And why do you think it is that sometimes we see Catholic lawmakers not only not towing the church's line, but often being at the forefront, for instance, on the same-sex marriage issue? So many of the Catholic governors that have supported this, or rather the governors who've supported same-sex marriage, are Catholics and often cite their Catholic faith as, this is sort of this human rights issue. And of course we know that, in the Senate where you served, you were certainly, when you were battling for the partial birth abortion ban, you were battling against Catholics oftentimes. Yes, Catholics who were not shy about the fact that they were indeed Catholics in public life and also at the same time supported abortion rights. Is there some sort of, is it a confusion among Catholics about what the church teaches? Is there some sort of something in the Catholic DNA that makes you more susceptible to sort of taking up these causes with such vigor when they're in fact the opposite of what the church says?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of answers to that question, and I don't think it's any one thing. I think first and foremost it's a poor formation. But in far too many pulpits, these issues are not talked about, and they're avoided because they're not popular, because the culture is moving one direction, and so there are many, even within the church, that say, well, we just need to, it's gone, and we just need to focus on other things. That's how you lose if you don't stand up and say what the beauty is of our faith. It's not what we're against, it's what we're for, it's what we believe in. I mean, that's what the beauty of what Pope Francis is doing. He's not talking about the no's, he's talking about the yeses, what we say yes to, not what we just say no to, but what we say yes to, and how beautiful human sexuality is, and how beautiful marriage is, and how positive it is, and how wonderful it is. And we don't, there's just far too many churches that don't do that. If you look at my election, the areas that I did the worst were the Catholic population was the highest. And you think that's a reflection of poor catechesis? Well, I think it's a reflection of folks not knowing what the church teaches, and maybe also a reflection of enforcement. Whether people who publicly flaunt this are then basically allowed to go out there and do that and pay no consequence to that. And I know that's a tricky subject, and it's one that I don't want to weigh into, and that's, I'm not saying they should or shouldn't, but it certainly does send a message when someone is out there saying, I'm a Catholic and I'm pro-choice and I believe abortion's a good thing, and they show up for communion and they show up at the church and everybody's all happy and everything's fine. So that does lead people to confusion. Now, what do you say to those who, you've been a very forceful defender of the right to life, the dignity of marriage. The church's stands on a lot of these non-negotiable moral issues. But you have been at odds with the bishops on issues like immigration and the whole issue of torture is a complicated one, but it came up in the campaign where some of your Catholic critics were saying, well, okay, but why aren't you lining up with the bishops on these issues? How do you answer that? Well, first off, there are the non-negotiables, right, that you can't disagree and be, as far as I'm concerned, in conformity with what the church's teachings are. And then there are issues of prudential judgment that are, in fact, negotiable. In fact, there are cases in which there is different of opinion. For example, torture. I'm not for torture, but some people say that this is torture, and I look at it and say, well, I don't believe that is torture. And so there is, and I don't think it's clear that one way or the other. I think I respect people who have an opinion on this, but I think I'm can use my prudential judgment to say, no, I think, under certain circumstances, and it's a balancing test. I think there's clearly things over the line, and if it's torture, then I don't want to be a part of it either. But there is a gray area, and I think that's an area for proper disagreement. There are a whole host of issues like that. A lot of foreign policy issues, for example, getting involved militarily. When do you do that? And I disagreed with the Pope on, getting involved in Iraq, for example. I don't think that makes me a bad Catholic. I think that says that I looked at the fact and circumstances that go through the same rubric that he does, which is, does this fit the just war theory and applying the facts and circumstances as I know it to those to that structure. I came up with a different decision, but it's a prudential judgment. It's one that I stand by.
Almost out of time. One quick question. It's widely known that you're considering a run for president
I'm
in
making
2016.
movies right now.
I know, but
The Christmas Candle, November 22nd, in theaters in your
All right, well, I won't
neighborhood.
ask you the direct question if you're going to run, but I will ask you this. A lot of, some of the talk I heard last time around was, I like Rick Santorum, and I like what he stands for on abortion and marriage and those issues, but a social conservative like that, he's never going to get elected in the general, so I can't vote for him in the primary because I'm throwing away my vote. What would you say to that person?
Well, let me just say that when the last two elections, we've tried people who weren't big on the social issues, and they both lost. And now we have the consequences of that. Look, the Democrats don't hesitate. Liberals and the left don't hesitate to nominate people who are true believers in what the party says they believe in. But we must have this complex that America doesn't really believe what we believe, and therefore we have to elect people. Well, then why do we believe it? I mean, why are you even there? Why are you trying? I mean, if you don't believe what we are advocating for is what's best for America, then go work for somebody else. But if you do, then we have an obligation to nominate someone who can actually articulate that vision, as opposed to apologize for that vision in part. And when America elects a leader, they want to elect someone that they know believes what they say they believe and will fight for what they say. They want someone they can trust, someone who they believe is authentic. Americans pretty tolerant of a lot of different points of view if they know you're honest with them and there's someone you can trust. I think we worry far too much about unpopular issues or social issues. We need to focus on the qualities of leadership and a vision for this country that conforms with what made this country great. And that's what we believe in. We just need to start believing in ourselves to articulate it better in the future.
Senator Rick Santorum, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you, Colleen.
We have to run to a break right now. When we come back, we'll talk with the University of Texas sociologist under fire for his findings on same-sex parenting. Stay with us. Welcome back to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. Today, Illinois became the 16th state to legalize gay marriage as Governor Pat Quinn, a Catholic, signed a same-sex marriage bill into law. Bishop Thomas Paprocki of Springfield, Illinois, called the legislation, quote, sinful and objectionable, and led a prayer service of supplication and exorcism earlier today. I recently discussed the growing national momentum toward same-sex marriage with Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone. He's the chairman of the U.S. Bishops' Subcommittee for the Promotion and Defense of Marriage. He's also the Catholic pastor-in-chief of San Francisco, a city famous for its support of gay rights. So how does the Archbishop balance those two roles? Here's what he told me.
Two things I would say. One is that there is also a lot of support for the church's teaching, even in San Francisco.
Really? Yeah.
Yes. I meet people who thank me for what I'm doing and encourage me and tell me that they're supporting me. So San Francisco is a very complex area because, yes, it's known for its gay culture. But there are a lot of immigrant groups too, especially from Asia, and then after that also from Latin America. So There's a lot of institutional presence of the church. The church, since the beginning of the Archdiocese in 1853, has been very present to the community in San Francisco, serving the needs of everyone, not just Catholics, through hospitals and orphanages and schools. So it's a complex reality. The other thing, it was really more of a confirmation of something I've already known, but things change when there's a personal contact. You know, we can stereotype people or stereotype a group of people if we don't know them. When there's a personal contact, there's a human contact, and when it's truly human, again, not coming from it ideologically, like I think that's what Pope Francis meant, that when I meet someone, it's because I want to convince them that I'm right and they're wrong. I'm convinced of the truth of what I believe, but I encounter this person because this person is made in the image and likeness of God. And Pope Benedict also spoke about this in his writings, that it has to be a true human encounter. And we love the person because they're a person, they have human dignity, they're made in the image of God. Then we might not change each other's minds, but it puts it in a very different context. It puts it in a human context, and it can be a real moment of grace.
On the marriage question, you've emphasized, and you emphasized this a little in the press conference Monday at the meeting here, that it's not just about fighting against same-sex marriage, it's about building up a healthy marriage culture in a country that has a 50% divorce rate, where cohabitation continues to be on the rise. How do you begin to do that? I mean, I know the bishops have put out some calls for prayer, they've put some resources online, but what more can be done, and what can lay Catholics do to support that? What
we're witnessing is it's been a long decline in the marriage culture. This has been going on for a very long time. In the cultural mindset, marriage already was redefined to be an adult-centered institution. So it's perfectly logical that now the law is acknowledging other types of marriages that are not between one man and one woman. There are other possibilities too beyond two people of the same sex. Why does it have to be limited to two people? Because if it's an adult-centered institution, well, yeah, then they're right if that's what marriage is meant to be. But if marriage is meant to be about the child, then we organize everything around that, and we think about what is in the best interest of the child. I always go at length to emphasize it's not a judgment on people's parenting skills. It doesn't mean that a single parent or even two people of the same sex are bad parents because of that. But it's not about whether or not they're good parents or bad parents. It's that the child comes from a man and a woman. Do we need an institution in our society that connects a child to the man and the woman who brought them into the world or not? Is that a good for the child or not? If we do need that, then it's marriage, because there's no other institution that does that. Marriage connects the husband and wife to each other and to any children that come from their union. Now that's not always possible in every situation, and it's becoming more and more the case. It's conceivable there could be cases where that might not be in a particular case in the best interest of that child. Society should do what is necessary to favor the situation of the child having the best possible advantage of being connected to their mother and their father and growing up. So we just need to teach people how to look at the issue from the standpoint of what is really best for the child, because it's not about the adults. And if it is, then what's the point of marriage having any recognition in the law? The government is interested in people's love lives, or how they work out their intimate relationships, or giving them affirmation because of their relationships. The reason marriage has the unique status it does in the law is because there's a public interest. The public interest is the children that come from the union of men and women. So to support the parents of the children in raising the children so they can be good, productive, responsible citizens. That's what we need to have a flourishing society.
All right. Archbishop Cordileone, thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, you're welcome.
When Archbishop Cordileone gave his fellow U.S. bishops an update on the marriage debate at their meeting last week, he cited a 2012 study that suggested adverse outcomes for children raised by gay and lesbian parents. Joining me now to talk about his new family structure study and the controversy surrounding it is Dr. Mark Regnerus. Mark is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Colleen. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. Let's start by talking about this study. You had to know this was going to be a controversial topic. Did you know it would be as controversial as it's turned out to be?
No, I didn't. The strange thing is when after I'd completed it, I wondered, would anybody pay attention? And I was, wrong.
Didn't turn out to be a problem.
Right. Did not turn out to be a problem. Yeah.
And tell us why you embarked on this study in the first place.
Well, a lot of the social science in this area had been leaning on studies of small samples and studies of sort of self-selected samples that just in the domain of social science, that's not nearly gold standard. You want to take a population-based sample to interview people randomly and interview more people, so to get a better sense of what's going on across the country as a whole.
And when you say this area, just to clarify for our viewers,
Right.
we're talking about the effects on children of being raised in same-sex households or by parents of the same sex. I mean,
Right.
that's generally the category we're talking about.
That's generally the category we're talking about. Broadly speaking, there's different ways to go about defining that, and so we elected to go in a particular direction of asking young adults instead of children or teenagers to identify for us whether their parent had a same-sex relationship, right? So we didn't ask whether they thought their parent was gay or lesbian, and these are young adults looking back upon their growing up years. So we didn't want them to presume upon how their parents would self-identify.
Okay, so you had 15,000 was your sample size, right, of young adults in general?
Right, that's the number we screened.
Okay.
We didn't interview all of those, although we interviewed everyone who said their mother or father had a same-sex romantic relationship.
Okay, and then what did you ask them about, and what were some of your findings?
The survey itself was general about how their lives are going now, to reflect upon their growing up years and their sentiments towards their parents, their relationship with their parents, their economic status when they were young, when they're currently as adults. So it meant to be kind of an omnibus thing, which is why we had in the study 40 different outcomes, some of which were from when they were younger, some of which were from their current status.
And this was everything from rates of depression to their own relationship status,
Right.
even thoughts of
You name it.
suicide, anything
Correct.
like that.
Yep.
So what did you find when you compared
Right.
children whose parents had been at some point in their childhood in a same-sex relationship that the children were aware of versus
Right.
children who hadn't?
Right. Well, we chopped it into a variety of different groups, and so when the key comparison was with kids whose parents were married and still are married at the time of the interview, which is a pretty self-select group, but it's also sort of what most people hope for in their own relationships and from their parents. So we noticed quickly that there were a lot of statistically significant differences between the kids who said, my mother or my father had a same-sex relationship, and kids whose parents were stably married and still are stably married. And we compared them also to other kids from single-parent families whose parents did not have a same-sex relationship, step-parents, that sort of thing. And I mean, compared to the kids who grew up in a stably married family, yeah, the kids whose mother had a same-sex relationship fared particularly poorly across, I think it was about 24 to 25 outcomes out of 40.
Just general well-being, success in life, what sort of things?
Both things that they reflected upon when they were younger, relationships, but as well as their current status today, like unemployment, educational achievement, things like that.
What
so
about the
both
children?
hard measures and more soft measures like relationship measures.
And you saw something similar for children whose fathers had been in a same-sex
Yeah,
relationship?
not quite as pronounced, in part because I suspect a fair number of them did not live with that father for very long, whereas that was they tended to live with the mother who had the same-sex relationship. Not necessarily with her and her partner at the same time. That was true of roughly half of them, but most of those relationships in the same household did not last very long at all.
Now, in reaction to this study, and it's been voluminous and pretty much immediate. I mean, it was you had was it 6 hours that you got the 200 scholars?
No, that took a few days,
okay,
but within 6 hours, people were ranting about it.
Okay, so we had, there were some 200 folks in the profession who wrote this letter saying this was denouncing the study, and then you did have also a letter of support from a number of faculty. You were investigated by the University of Texas for your scientific methods, but you were exonerated, and right now there's a case winding its way. Looks like your publisher has just lost a case where the judge wanted all the records related to this turned over. So huge reaction. But one of the main criticisms, and we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to quickly touch on this, is that some say you compared apples to oranges. You took a kid whose parents had broken up, and then the parent had some sort of same-sex relationship, and compared him to the kid whose mom and dad never broke up. Same-sex marriage advocates say, well, nowadays that same-sex marriage is catching on. Those homes of same-sex couples are going to be stable homes for kids, and that all your study really proves is stability is good for kids. Doesn't matter gender or orientation of parents.
It sure does prove that stability is good for kids. And one of the things that I've been pleased about is that people left and right have decided that this is certainly one message that's come from this study. The apples versus oranges thing is accurate, although it's not because we didn't attempt to do apples versus apples. Just stability did not appear among the vast majority of kids who said their mother or father had a same-sex relationship.
So you just weren't
seeing a chance to appear,
stable same-sex relationships.
And people could say, oh, I lived with my mother and her partner for all 18 years or 10 of 18 years. That just was a very, very uncommon result. So it is apples versus oranges, and the question is whether that's still true today. That's an empirically testable question, but I don't think the data exists to analyze that yet. There's a lot of speculation that, oh yes, these relationships will be more stable. At the same time, there is some emerging data from both Scandinavia and the United States that suggests the stability may be not as pronounced as people expect it to be.
Well, after the reaction to all this, is this something you're going to study further?
Well, it's a politically challenging time to continue to study this, right? I mean, the editor of the journal has come under such fire that, I can't imagine any other editors saying, hey, sign me up, I'll publish a study on this, even a very solid study. But other studies have been published on this, including an analysis of Canadian census data, which also suggested that children in same-sex households were less likely to graduate high school than other kinds of children. So research is moving forward on this. It's the ceiling for what can be done in this area, especially with such small populations and subsamples of those populations who have children. I think the ceiling is pretty, not very high. So, but I'm confident that I'm not afraid of data, right? So more studies should be done. More analysis of this data should be done. I released my data already a year ago so that other people can look at it. So progress is happening, although I think progress will ultimately be slow going.
Yeah. Mark Regnerus, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Finally tonight, this Sunday's Feast of Christ the King marks the end of the Church's liturgical year. It also marks the end of the Year of Faith that Pope Benedict XVI proclaimed last October. Benedict wanted the year to be a time of renewed conversion to Jesus and rediscovery of faith. EWTN News Nightly recently hit Catholic University's campus here in D.C. to ask people what the Year of Faith has meant to them. Take a look.
It's really appropriate that we have a transition of the Holy Fathers during this Year of Faith, and how the Church is being invited to trust more in Christ's leadership of his flock.
For myself, my resolution is even stronger as a teacher of catechist to continue learning about my faith, because as I shared with them, I don't know everything.
For me, it's been kind of going back to the basics, understanding that all this theology, no matter how much you read about Balthasar or Thomas Aquinas, it all goes back to faith, and that there's no such thing as an intellectual conversion. Even someone as smart, as intelligent as Aquinas or Augustine, their conversion was a conversion of faith in the heart.
That's all for tonight. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And you can catch our entire program again on EWTN's YouTube page. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell, and on behalf of all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.